Minglawashi. Welcome to the ARWD's online panel discussion on the development of the labor market in Myanmar and its governance in the countries. This panel discussion is a joint effort of the ARWD Media and the Denmark Embassy in Myanmar to highlight the policy around the labor issues and governance. Thanks to the Denmark Embassy and Mr. Ambassador for the support and participations. Today panel, we will have a Denmark Ambassador to Myanmar, Mr. John Nielsen, and other panelists to talk about the issues on the labor markets. Our first panelist is Umang Mao, the chairman of the Confederation of Trade Unions, CTUM. CTUM has been working on the labor issue in Myanmar for more than 2 decades. Another panelist is Sayama Do Kankainwe. She's the General Secretary of Myanmar Garment Manufacturer Association. She's also the Joint Secretary General of the Union of Myanmar Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, UMFCCI. Another panelist is Dr. Zhou, the Executive Director of the Center for Economic and Social Development, which is an independent think tank working dedicated to inclusive development in Myanmar. Dr. Zhou is a currently migration expert and advising the current government on the migrations. The last, not the least, panelist is Mr. Jesper Nielsen, the head of the trade union called United Federation of Workers in Denmark. His organization is known as 3F. He has 20 years of experience in the international trade union issues and labor market, and he has been advising for the labor markets in regions including Myanmar. First, I'd like to open the discussion with Denmark Ambassador to Myanmar, Mr. John Nielsen. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for giving us time to participate. I would like to start with you with some questions. What are the most important elements in the development of Myanmar labor markets?
Yeah, since 2016, Denmark has been very active in supporting labor market reforms here in Myanmar. And I think Myanmar is an economy which is opening up, and also a country which wants to create more decent jobs for the people working at the different companies. I think it's very important that we strengthen the institutions which are actually key to modernizing the labor market in Myanmar. I think that's important to create better jobs, more decent jobs. It's also important to make Myanmar more competitive in the economic development in the region and the world. And it's definitely also very important in order to attract more foreign investments. I think one of the things that we have been looking at has been the issue of unsafe working conditions, and which you see in a lot of companies, unfortunately, still in Myanmar. And I think there are also a number of disputes going on which influences negatively the business environment. And I think it's many companies from abroad are concerned about these issues, and because entering into the market in Myanmar, you are actually taking or you're putting yourself into a reputational risk if you have a lot of companies which are not compliant with the labor market standards that you see in other parts of the world. The consumers in Europe or in Denmark, for instance, are very concerned about where they get their goods from. They want to be sure that when they buy something, it has been produced through implying also good labor market standards. Thank you. So why is the labor market one of the focus area in the Danish support to Myanmar? I think it's based on our own experiences and the experiences that we have had in other countries with working with these issues. And as I said, Myanmar, the economy and the labor market are undergoing profound and very, very rapid changes, and that puts a lot of pressure on the companies in the world, in Myanmar. If they want to be competitive in an international market, they have to live up to certain standards, and they have to live up to working conditions and decent work for their workers. Otherwise, consumers in many parts of the world don't want to buy the thing. So I think that's very important. And as I said, we have this tradition of the government and employer and employers associations to work together. We believe that a dialogue between the three parties is the way to modernize in the future the labor market in Myanmar. You need the three parties to be together to discuss things and work together. So I think that's very, very important. I mean, the whole social dialogue between the three parties is essential if you want to move forward, and it's a basic condition for the labor market reform in Myanmar.
Thank you. And my next question is, what is your assessment in the Myanmar labor market, as you have been working and you have been supporting Myanmar for some years?
We've been supporting it for 5 years, and Myanmar has been in this process for less than a decade. So it's a very, very short time frame. But if you look back 10 years ago, comparing it today, I think Myanmar have moved a lot forward. It would not have been possible 10 years ago to sit down the government and the employers associations and the employees association to work together on developing tripartite negotiation. Also, the work that we have seen concerning the development of the occupational safety and health law has been a concerted effort between the three parties, which I think is very important. There's a lot to do still for Myanmar, but it's a process which have, I think, advanced pretty fast over the last 4 years that we have been working with it. First of all, we have an advisor who is working with the ministries in NAPIDO, the Ministry of Labour and Immigration and Population, and who have been supporting also the development of the occupational safety and health law. The advisor has also been quite a bit engaged in many of the legal frameworks that we have actually supported. More than 600 small and medium-sized enterprises in Myanmar with matching grants, where we have paid half of the price of a project where they are improving the working conditions of laborers at their workplace or their company place. I should also say now we are still in a COVID time. We have actually used the support to the small and medium-sized enterprises. In March, April, when the pandemic started, many of these small and medium-sized enterprises were shut down or were not able to produce to the European market. Many of them are garment companies. So what we did was that we decided to let them repurpose their production. So instead of producing garment for the European market, they did over 4 or 5 months produce PPE or face mask and isolation gowns. They have actually produced more than 1.3 million face masks for which have been distributed to hospitals and street vendors and poor people in Yangon. So that has been really an important contribution. Then we have also, I think, and it's important to say that we have the Danish Employers Union and also the trade unions. They are active here. They're working together here on different projects. And they're working with some Danish companies in the garment sector also to ensure that you get decent work and you create added value in the production. So So we have quite a bit, and then we're working with Irrawaddy, and you are providing a good attention to labor market issue also, which I think is very important because it is an area which you don't hear a lot about in the news, but I think it's involving a lot of people, and it's very important to develop this area and the institutions within this area. I think Myanmar needs to strengthen the institutions at all levels, and particularly on the labor market, it's very, very important that you get strong institutions to support the development of the economy. I would like to thank you all for the cooperation that we have had over these years. I think if we look back, all of you have been participating in doing a tremendous job. There's still a lot of way to go in many areas, but I think it's key that we continue this support and this cooperation in the future. So I wish you a very good discussion here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'd like to open the panel to our panelists. So first, I would like to start the discussion with the questions to the Umang. So could you start with a brief introduction to the current labor policy in Myanmar and the existing mechanism to improve the labor-related legislations?
Thank you very much. First, we need to look at the topic, which are two things. One is to develop the labor market, and another is talking about better governance. First, we would like to congratulate the NLD for its overwhelming win during the last election. It means that the people look at what they had done for the last 5 years and have given the confidence to the NLD. So what we would like to hear also now is regarding the governance. One is that the tripartite dialogue forum has been in place since 2015, and it has its agreements, disagreements, but we would like the incoming government and the parliament to adopt the ILO Convention 144, which talks about the tripartite dialogue system mechanism. And number two, what we would like to have is to have a better governance. What we and also the public service personnel are requesting is all the former military personnel who were just dropped there out of the sky without no experience be retired and replaced with respective career personnel of the sector. Number two is also all the former military personnel who are working as ambassadors or in the Foreign Affairs Department or the ministry needs to be retired and replaced by career diplomats who know what they are talking about. And the law needs to be reviewed, amended, and drawn up. All of us agree that we need investment, but also regarding with the new investments and the new jobs, we need to have new laws. And for example, well, how do we deal with the Grab taxi drivers? How do we deal with the food delivery people? And how do we deal with the online marketing? All these things needs laws and regulations so that with new investments, new issues, new industrial disputes can be sorted out if we have the law. Otherwise, we will always be told that the laws are weak in Burma. And for example, we have to finish the OSH law, the Occupational Safety and Health law, which has been in process for the last 2 years. But especially in this kind of COVID-19 issue, we have not finished this law, so we need to finish this law. Then it is good news that there are new cities are being built up, new industrial zones are good. But together to go with that, we would like to have the investors invest in training centers in those areas. Because when we're talking about employment, employing our youth, employing our women, employing our returned migrant workers, we need to have training centers in those newly opening industrial zones so that people can be trained for what the work will need and be certified for the incoming jobs. Then also what we would like to have is to have a better industrial relations. We would like to have the public sectors be integrated into the Myanmar dispute settlement law and its related mechanism. And regarding migrants, we are talking about at the regional level, we are talking about portable social security, and we would like to have the social security board pushing onto that. Then another thing is on the extraction industry. We have yearly deaths in Dhaka, where during the monsoon there is landslide and hundreds of people die. There needs to be enforcement mechanisms on the extraction law. There should be penalties so that we can save lives. So this would be for the industries. But at the same time, as a confederation, what we would like to talk about is for the agriculture sector also. Because of the COVID-19, we also, all of us understand that agriculture sector is going to be the largest sector that will develop. And to start all these things, for example, to have our people to do this good agriculture practice, the government should be able to provide free soil testing so that the farmers know what they should be planting, what they should not be planting. And the last thing would be for a mechanism established for consistent, transparent policy discussions regarding imports of agricultural goods and food into the country. So these would be the things that we would like to make inputs into the incoming government and to the parliament so that we have a good labor market as well as good governance for the labor market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sia Umama. You have touched on a lot of issues in a small amount of time. That's really great. So I would like to come back to you later after I give floor to the other panelists. I would like to go to Siama Dorkankainwe. You've been in the private sector for many years and actively participating on the development of the labor better labor policy. I now would like to hear your view on the effort on the current legislation change. What needs to be done, and what are the areas that immediately need to tackle these issues, like Umoma has pointed out in his answer.
Thank you, Siama. First, I would like to talk about the labor market first. Actually, the labor market is the demand and the supply of the workforce and the demand of the business. So there's labor market. And for the labor market government, actually, we have to coordinate and control the activities at the workplace with all the parties involved. Now, at this moment, our tripartite group, like the government and the trade unions and the employers, we are trying to work on the labor law reforms. We need to check back to 1951 or 1949 or 1960 law. All these laws are still intact. And with the new laws coming out, there's some certain contradictory points. We found it. And there are many things that we don't understand what this means. Because when we study the previous 1950, 60, 70 laws, and now the existing one, there are some of the things that, we keep on asking why it happened. We have to reform the labor organization law. Okay, we have to reform the minimum wage law, dispute settlement law, all these we need to do. At the same time, somebody must work on that mid-1900s law. And these laws, even though the new laws coming up, sometimes the notification or the directives from the government institutions coming up, they linked to that law. And sometimes we don't understand. For example, I really want to talk about it. In 1882, there was one law during the Indian government time. This concerned with the financial institution. And in that law, they specifically mentioned that, if a holiday is overlapped, and that they extended one holiday. That is, we understand when we refer to that law, that concerns with the financial institutions and the banks. But lately, this year, when the government, the office of the government announced in the notification, they referred to that law and they said all these, the holidays that we have it, the public holidays, if it happens to be on Saturday or Sunday, we have to add on. So this Tazaldai happens to be on Sunday. So pre-Dasaundai is Saturday, so we have 2 days holiday. But what happened, because pre-Dasaundai is on Saturday, so we have to add Friday to become a holiday. And Dasaundai, the full moon day, is Sunday. And we have to add Monday to become a holiday. So 4 days closed with paid, full paid. So I'm not complaining about payment or not payment. What I'm saying is, and why we have the Factory Act for the factories. And in that act, it is clearly mentioned that there will be no substitution for the holidays, even if it happened on the holidays, the public holidays. They have the certain kind of provision word, okay? So we said, why this law said there's no substitution or add-on? And the other law said they can add on. And these two laws basic is different. This one is the factory, related to factory and workplaces, and the other one is for the financial institution. But when this announcement coming out, every workplace have to close. We really would like to ask whether this notification covers or concerns the workplaces or the factories. But we have no answer. According to the laws, to their related laws, relevant laws, we think this is different. But eventually, we are very diligent and obedient, okay? All the factories we close on that day. So if we work for overtime, we pay double. So these are the things that, so law reform, we put a lot of effort in that, but we want someone to look into those laws also and try to find out what is a contradicting point. Because, if we really want a sound labor market governance, it really concerns with the regulation. It concerns with, how we manage the regulation and how we enforce the regulation. It is like bridging the gap between promise and performance, When the law comes out, there's a promise, okay? But in reality, it's a performance. But if these laws are contradicting one another and not helping the businesses to work in an enabling environment, I can see, how can the business, we really want to be a good corporate citizen, good business person, but if we really want to keep the good governance, we have to look into the laws first. I think Umar is smiling. I think he agrees to that because he's around. He's a global person, okay? He's moving around. He knows how it works. So I really would like the policy makers, okay, whoever can make the decision, to look into that area. Now the legislation, we find like unharmonized legislation. So then we have to work on it. Then the investment from outside or inside can come in very happily because the government is promoting the investment. Yesterday, we had the OECD second Myanmar investment policy review, very good. We want to conduct the responsible business. All these, it's very much in our heart. We will bring into our DNA. But we need an enabling environment, a conducive environment. Then I think the governments will be very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to now move on to Dr. Zoru. So I would like to touch on your observation, your analysis of this government and legislative issues, labor-related legislative issues in Myanmar. So could you please share us what is your analysis on the current under the current government? Or you can also compare what your experience under the previous government and the current under the government. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don Ying, and also Audi for interviewing me. Yes, when we talk about the labor market, it would not be complete if we don't say anything about the migrant workers, because the migrant workers are also important segment of our labor markets. It is being extended from Myanmar to all the neighboring economies, especially within the ASEAN, and then also recently in with our big neighbor China, we do have migrant workers working in all of our neighboring economies. Um, you know, according to the some estimations as well as the actual register numbers, we know that there are about 4 to 5 million migrant workers who are working in Southeast Asia and also China and the East Asian economies like Korea, Japan, and many other Asia Pacific countries. Out of that, we know that about 2.5 registered workers working in Thailand and Malaysia alone. And in Thailand, we estimated that there are about 2 million unregistered or illegal migrant workers working across Thailand. So in a way, we Myanmar have something like a 20 million workers. So it's about one quarter of our active labor population is actually working outside of the country. Um, Unlike other the migration corridors happening in industrialized economies, our migrant workers are mostly temporary. It means that they work temporarily in Thailand and Malaysia, and then they tend to come back, and then they try to save money while they were working overseas, and then they try to use that savings to do the business, and then also establish small and the cottage industries in the villages, and so it's also becoming a very important uh, contribution to our local economies. Another big issue that we often don't discuss is about the remittances that the migrant workers are sending back home. The World Bank in 2018 have estimated that we have received something like a 3.8 billion US dollars worth of remittances from all these overseas migrant workers, which I think in that year has surpassed the foreign direct investment, the actual flows of the FDIs into the country. So that phenomenon is also quite similar to many other developing countries where the remittances tend to be much larger than the FDI. As you may know, the current government, especially in the wake of COVID-19, the government has been, crying out for the FDI. So they think the FDI will be the panacea for all the solutions, and then they have been actively seeking the foreign investor coming and working in the country. But no one really pay attention to the remittances that our migrant workers have contributed, which is much larger than the FDIs. Our government should really, recognize them and then try to do our best to help the migrant workers, and then also to protect them when they needs help. So this is where I think it becomes quite relevant to the COVID-19 situations when the pandemic hit Myanmar and also our neighboring economies. Many of our migrant workers have to return to the country, and then upon their return, they face a lot of challenges reintegrating with our economy, and as well as during the transit, they face a lot of challenges. So I would like to come back to the more serious questions about the laws and the legislative development that we need. Especially, I think these are the kind of outstanding issues for the new government to tackle. I would like to touch on the 5 areas. One Well, most of them are very relevant to what we call the social protection, especially during the crisis of COVID-19. So in the COVID-19, you don't talk about the mobility and the growth. It is more about the protection of the vulnerables. And then the migrant workers are one of the most vulnerable type of workers. So I think we have to emphasize on the social protection. So in the area of social protection, there are like a five areas that I like to emphasize. The first is that we need to have an unemployment benefit scheme under the Social Security Board. As you know, the Social Security law has come out in 2012, and then in 2014, we started to practice the Social Security schemes. Under the current scheme, all the insured workers are entitled to have the medical and sick benefits, and then also the accidents and the life insurance, and then also the maternal and child health protection, but we don't have an unemployment benefit scheme, mainly because the workers and the employers still need to agree on how much they can contribute. So maybe perhaps this is a high time that the government should really accelerate the formalization of the employment scheme, and then to try to work out the tripartite solution for that. The second area is about the skill training. We have a National Skills Standard Authority, and then this is where they are responsible for certifying the workers' skills so that the workers can actually work with the skill certificates. And then they can also work in ASEAN market, the labor market. So because of these are the certificates that all other ASEAN members will also recognize. Because, during the time of the crisis, all the industries are changing, and then they are also upgrading. So we will need our workers to be retrained and retooled so that they can actually live up to the new market requirements. And then the third area that we really need to scale up is the area on the job search. Right now, the workers and employers, they have to search by themselves, and then our job search mechanisms are not so good, especially for the unskilled labor, especially for the blue collar workers. That we do have a commercial solutions for the white collar and more executive type of search. The fourth one is something I wanted to bring it up because the last week Myanmar just signed up what we call the Regional Comprehensive Economic Plan (RCEP). The RCEP is a big regional integration agenda where it's mature and built upon the after and then also the ASEAN Economic Community concept. Unfortunately, even though the RCEP is such an exciting agreement for the businesses to do better, but it doesn't really have much references to the migration of the workers. Right now, I think that most of the unskilled labor movement are not necessarily dealt under any of the ASEAN mechanisms, and then so I think this is where we have to work harder as a migrant sending country to really get the better response from the receiving countries. So this is where I think we can also come up with innovative mechanism, something like a portability of the social security benefits. Last not the least, one initiative that the current government is doing under the Myanmar Economic Recovery and Reform Plan (MERP), which is a post-COVID recovery plan for the labor market. And there's a one catching phrase in the new plan. It's what they call the facilitate the reverse migration. So to me, I think this is a bit of a ill-conceived idea that we need to reverse the migration. It means that we have to, facilitate the return of all the migrants working in the country, which, in a way, is quite unpractical and not very feasible under the current circumstances. because there are something like 150,000 migrants who just recently returned from Thailand, and then many of them are actually can't really find a job in Myanmar, and then they face a lot of tough situations. And the SMEs also can't really absorb the new labor at this point. They are still struggling a lot. In my very candid assessment, to me, I think that Thailand and Malaysia still offers a much better chance of employing them rather than our own job market, which is not really feasible to receive any more workers at this point. So I think this is my last point of comments, and then thank you very much for your interview.
Thank you, Dr. Zhou. You touched on a lot of issues from the migrants worker onto the legislation and everything. And I also like to have a follow-up question to you because of the COVID, because migrant returnees from Thailand and others like Malaysia and other countries, because of the COVID, they have been affected most. And it also, as you had pointed out, their remittance also reduced, and it has indirect effect on the local economies, right? So
Yes.
For these migrants, as you also point out, the job opportunity, is also not available at the moment because of COVID. So how can we, solve this problem?
The remittances are very important element for our social safety net. Because most of our migrant workers are from the rural areas. So these remittances are helping the rural families to cope with a lot of deep-seated poverty situations in our rural economies. In many rural communities, remittances are being used for the investing in agriculture. They have also improved their living conditions, and then many the family members also use them for the health and education, because in these times the health emergency caused a lot of needs, and then the remittances help the dependent families back in the country to use these resources to cope with the emergency situation. So I think it's a very important social protection tool, which our government is very lucky to have such a large safety nets, which is not out of the government fund. It is being done individually by the migrant workers. For the minimum wage, I think I would rather give Umamong and Do Kangai Nguyen to also discuss later, because I think now the minimum wage is due for a review, and then it would be quite critical for all of us to sit together and try to work out amicably so that our minimum wage adjustment can go smoothly.
Thank you, Dr. Zhou. I now would like to move on to questions about Mr. Jasper Nelson. As you have an experience working with the international labor market and international trade unions for 20 years. Your experience is valuable, I think, to the Myanmar labor market too. And also you are the labor market advisor and who has experience in occupational health and safety issues. So that is really, I think, during this time in Myanmar and in globally, we are facing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and with your expertise and with the labor market's condition in Myanmar, what do you see of the Myanmar current effort in this or the topic and labor-related issue that other panelists have discussed? And what would be your advice to the people of Myanmar in different sectors?
Thank you so much for that, and good morning from Denmark. I'm invited, and I feel honored to be invited to this panel. I would like to give my greetings also for the rest of the labor market consortium from Denmark, which also includes the Confederation of Danish Industry and the Danish Trade Union Advisory Agency, Trade Union Development Agency, sorry. We've been working with the partners in Myanmar for some years. I started coming to Myanmar 3 years ago, no more. But I must say that I'm impressed by the labor market parties in Myanmar, because you've only had less than 10 years to develop this labor market model that you're striving to have. We in Denmark have had more than 120 years to have a development and reach the way we work today, with a lot of cooperation between government, employers and trade unions. The first thing we did when the COVID-19 hit our country was to make a tripartite agreement about how to deal with companies with unemployed workers or suspended workers with suspended contracts, and we've tried to manage the labor market together here. I think that is important. I think that's the way forward in other countries as well. I've been to Africa and Latin America, and in Asia I have seen some of your countries, and I think that from the international level there's a lot of experience to reach out to and learn from. And as a small Danish country, we are not trying to impose our model on your country. We think that you should pick and choose from the experience you can find in neighboring countries at international level. And of course, one of the important levels in this is the ILO and the ILO conventions. And I've seen that at this level you still have a lot to do. You have ratified some of the conventions, but far from all of them, not even the core labor rights conventions. And when you talk about occupational safety and health, you've been hit very hard by the COVID-19 pandemic several times. In the beginning, you couldn't get the raw material to your garment factories, and then later you were hit again, maybe later than us with the pandemic as such, but with a lot of uncertainties for workers. What can they do? How can they be protected when they go to work, when they have to stay home, and so on? So there's a lot of things. There are lots of lessons to be learned from the situation that you're in. I think the progress you made should be continued. I think it's very important for Myanmar to continue improving the labor market conditions and the governance of the labor market. I think compliance with international standards is crucial for your integration into international value chains, for attracting foreign investment. And I think that to become better at social dialogue and at agreeing between employers, workers, and government, you had to train, you had to practice, you had to learn from your own lessons. That's at least what I've seen around the world, that it's a step-by-step process. So you've been doing some progress in dispute settlement with a system of township conciliation and arbitration bodies and the arbitration council. You've also seen that there are some loopholes in it, and that there have been a good progress directly negotiated between a number of factories and IWFM about the freedom of association agreement, whereupon you can build improved dispute settlement mechanisms and a procedure for collective bargaining. And I think it points ahead to the future, that these are areas where the system needs to be improved. And I agree very much with what has been said to clean up the old laws, make sure there are no contradictions, and maybe make a complete reform of the labor market system as such. In talking about tripartite negotiations and bipartite negotiations, the social dialogue as such, I think confidence is very important. And I think you can build confidence if you have some successes with it, when you learn to be able to trust each other, that when you make an agreement, this agreement is what we'll stick to, we will comply with it. In occupational safety and health, I think that you have made a law, but it's still not really being implemented as far as I understand. And I think the governance with a council at national level, a tripartite council at national level, bringing in some expertise, technical expertise, and then the committees at workplace level are important areas of training in social dialogue, and of seeing that you have workers and employers have common interests in improving the workplace, making it more easy to produce, making it more productive, and making space for better income for both employers and workers. Also, it was mentioned that to develop the labor market, you need training. It was mentioned both by Mang and Kan Wei. I think also Saw Wu mentioned that skills development, training centers, making sure that your supply of labor corresponds to the future demands of the market. And if you want to attract edge technology companies or develop them in the country, which I think you should do. I don't think you can live from developing the garment sector for many years to come. I think you should develop and diversify the economy. So I think it's a very good idea to put emphasis on these training centers, and technical and vocational education and training would be an important area. Then finally, I think you should also look at gender aspects, which is also a not very conflictive area of cooperation, to make sure that both men and women can work in the workplaces in Myanmar. There are lots of good things being done around the world now, but also think about it has been mentioned, social security, very important for the future, not only in Myanmar, in a lot of countries in the world. So that you will not experience a drop in, for instance, buying power overnight when a crisis hits, but that you can maintain a certain level of buying power, which means that the crisis will hit less hard. But also think about the need for women to have childcare centers, to be able to free themselves from the obligations in the house, to be able to work the number of hours that you're used to working in Myanmar, to have equal access to careers, equal access to training, and so on. These are some of the areas I would recommend, but this is all up to you, and you can feel confident that we are here to support you in the development that you are choosing in Myanmar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jasper. It's really fruitful that the discussion focused on the having trainings and other like legislative change on to develop the labor sector in Myanmar. I would like to give you 1 minute to wrap up the final questions. That would be, as you know, we have new government in next year. So based on your experience and reflection from the past 5 to 10 years under the democratic the government, so what would be your suggestion to the new government? I would look at the time. Please start, Sia Umomo. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I had mentioned before the NLD has the trust of the people. And reviewing the last 5 years, the policies has not been bad, but the implementation had some issues. Therefore, we need to look at who were the obstacles, what were the obstacles, and change the bureaucratic administrative system according to needed. And that is where I find that the former military people who are not used to the civilian service need to be removed. And in the places, the people from the various sectors, the bureaucrats who have the expertise, be made to work in those places. That is where we would have the full implementation of the policies and also fulfill the international standards that are needed to get into the global supply chain and into the global market.
Thank you. Siama Do Kankainwe, would you like to suggest anything to the new government?
Before suggesting, not out of 1 minute, okay? And before that, another one I would like to say, because you are going to make the policy thing, before we give the final policy, another one that can be easily changed is our law said, okay, in this law also, they said, over time have to pay double. There's a law said. But then the 51 Factory Act said that the 8 continuous, the work that I say, so we have two different working hours. For this 8 continuous type of business, 48 hours they allow, and the rest of the business, 44 hours they allow. And these 44 hours in 1967, there's the internal directive coming out inside the ministry. They formulate, they develop a formula in which the factories work for 44 hours but have to pay for 48 hours. How complicated that is. Okay, that's a formula, and this is an internal directive. It is not the law or the legislation or the regulation. What makes us confusing is like when the minimum wage law is out. In the law, minimum wage is like per day, per hour. So now we have 4,800 per day now. So per hour it becomes like 600. Okay, that's fine. But this 600, when we calculate with the formula, it is not double. The law said double, but the formula makes us 2.19. And thanks to CGM and the unions, at the first minimum wage setting, we agree. Because CGM knows, the union knows that in the law says double. So we agree like double. So it becomes like if 4,800, we pay 600. So for overtime, multiplied by 2 is 1,200. But another instruction coming out from the ministry, inside the ministry, if a factory is paying more than 4,800, they have to calculate with the formula. That means if a factory paying like basic minimum wage 4,800, overtime is 1,200 per hour. But if that factory pays like 4,801 jat extra, it goes into the formula. And it will become 1,314 jat. So what we are saying is, this confused the businesses, and then this is not encouraging the businesses to raise the basic wage. That's a point. What I would like to say is harmonization of the legislations and then coordinated work among the institutions. When I say institutions, it's all public and private and unions all, okay? Coordinated. Because when we talk about labor market governance or labor market, everybody, they think like, okay, it is the MOLEP's thing. Minister of Labor, Immigration and Relations thing. No. Labor market means business. Labor market means employment. Labor market means education, training. And labor market means market. And compliance, all these in the labor market. So when it comes to labor market, we need investment. We need to coordinate because we're different, in the business wide, and the unions also. So all these coordination among them, horizontally, vertically, among the ministries, among the private sector associations, among the unions, and as a whole.
Yes, thank you so much. It's touched on a lot of things. And it's also good to notice that there is a conflicting effort in the raising minimum wages, and the private sector's a challenge in raising that. So to the Dr. Zhou, I would like to hear your thoughts on how should that new government tackle these problems that when labor forces, like especially is really related to the migrations, because of very low wages in Myanmar, there is a lot of migrants workers leaving the countries. But there is a state challenge for the private sector to increase and to increase the wages, and also the law is contradicting. So what would be your suggestions, to solve these problems?
Thank you for a good question. For the new government, I have a big yes to what Shama Do Kankainwe had just mentioned. I think what she meant was, I think we need to pay attention to the institutional development. I think which is try to add more to what Umamong just said. It's not just enough to have a personal changes. It's also important to upgrade the governance institutions that are governing the labor market. To start with the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, and Population. To me, I think to follow Umamong's word, I don't think that will be sufficient just to remove some of those what they call the parachutists, right? So muja shui guri, no muja shui guri. To remove the parachutists may not really solve the problem, because there will be even more parachutists in the past, in the future, because parachutists from another era, and then in the new era there will be parachutists for someone completely new and unfamiliar with the Ministry of Labor might be coming to the ministry and then try to do what they think is the best for the people. So maybe I think this is in that kind of a scenario, it will be very important for the new government to really develop the institutions. We're starting with the Ministry of Labor. For instance, like a minimum wage setting committee. The committee now needs to be institutionalized so that it will become a more regular and institutionalized action rather than the negotiations. Sometimes the negotiations can lead to nowhere, and then maybe we need to have a bit of a more depoliticized kind of institutional mechanisms to solve and resolve the very complex labor issues. The second thing which I wanted to emphasize is about the policy. The government really needs to appreciate the policy of the labor market development, because I just mentioned about the policy of inviting foreign direct investments, and then policy of facilitating the remittances flows. To me, I think the evidence is very clear that we have to prioritize the remittances flows and then make sure that remittances are still coming and they are being utilized for the productive economic recovery of the country. And then we can't really cry out for the foreign direct investments. In that way, the Ministry of Labor really needs to be giving a higher significance role. Right now, in terms of protocol-wise, the Ministry of Labor is the last. And in terms of budget, they received a very low budget from the government. So maybe I think this is where the government can change the priorities. And then they really need to upgrade the Ministry of Labor to the top tiers.
Thank you. It's really great to hear the recommendation and seem like a pragmatic approach. I would like to now go to the last question to the Mr. Jasper. So given that talk about the labor market and that issues that Myanmar has been dealing and facing, what would be your advice to the foreign investor?
Thank you for that question. I think foreign investors should live up to the highest international standards when they operate in Myanmar. I would say that includes assisting in upgrading the skills of the workforce and in making sure they live up to the general standards of international the labor market, both in health and safety, gender, and influence, democratic influence in the workplace, with elected representatives, with trade union influence, and so on. That would really be important, I think, to have some good cases. But maybe you will allow me also to say to the government that
yes,
I think it's important to include and involve the two labor market parties even more. If you are part of the process of legislation and making the rules and regulations, you will also be much more motivated to comply with these regulations. You will understand them better, you will see the logic in them, and then there will be much less to do for the labor market, the Ministry of Labor. Even though you can upgrade and put resources into a Ministry of Labor, you will never be able to inspect all workplaces in 1 year. You will always be dependent on employers and the trade unions or the active representatives of the workers to make workplaces comply with the national legislation. So I think this cooperation and the tripartite mechanism to develop the national tripartite dialogue forum into something even more operational and have subcommittees for each sector, that would be a recommendation taken from the international level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper. As a representative of private sector, Siama Dokankainwe, would you like to add anything on that?
Regardless of the issues that we are discussing now, we would like to invite the investors to come in. Please do come in. Because we are discussing this very outspokenly now, very outwardly talking. That means we know this and we are trying to find solutions to tackle the solutions. So that is a good gesture from us. So trust us, we are moving and we will be processing and progressing. So we want to invite the investors, please do come in.
This is really, giving a thought, and we hope the Myanmar labor market will, have more development, and we have a better governance system in next 5 years or so. So thank you so much. Thank you all the panelists and Mr. Ambassador for the participation.